The afternoon sun shined softly through the tall glass windows of the old concert hall. Inside, the air carried the quiet echo of piano notes from earlier rehearsals. The place was busy that day. Musicians, students, and visitors moved around the large room, whispering to each other and setting up for the evening performance. At the center of the hall stood a beautiful grand piano. Its polished surface reflected the warm lights above it. People gathered nearby, hoping to see something special. After all, a world-famous pianist was scheduled to rehearse there before the big show that night. Everyone seemed excited. Some young music students sat in the front rows with notebooks in their hands. Others stood near the walls, hoping to watch closely and maybe learn something. For many of them, seeing a famous pianist play in person was a rare opportunity. Near the back of the room stood a young boy. He looked much younger than most of the people around him. His clothes were simple but neat. His hands rested quietly at his sides. The boy did not look toward the stage the way everyone else did. His eyes were still unfocused. He was blind, but he stood there calmly, listening. Every small sound in the room seemed to reach him. The quiet steps on the wooden floor, the soft whispers between students, the distant sound of a piano key being tested somewhere backstage. He tilted his head slightly as if he could feel the music in the air. A few people noticed him standing there alone. One woman who worked at the hall watched him for a moment. She wondered if the boy had come with someone, maybe a parent or teacher, but she did not see anyone nearby who seemed to be with him. The boy did not appear nervous. In fact, he looked very peaceful, almost as if he had come to a place he loved. Not long after, the door near the stage opened. The famous pianist walked into the hall. The room quickly grew quiet. People recognized him immediately. Some whispered excitedly while others straightened up in their seats. Cameras came out of pockets. Students leaned forward. The pianist walked slowly toward the grand piano. He was known around the world for his performances. Concert halls in many countries had welcomed him. People admired not only his skill but also the deep emotion he brought to every piece he played. But at that moment, he was simply preparing for rehearsal. He placed his hands gently on the piano keys and pressed a few notes, testing the sound. The soft tones echoed through the hall. Everyone listened carefully. Even the boy at the back seemed to focus deeply. The pianist played a short melody to warm up his fingers. The music floated through the room like a quiet conversation. After a few minutes, he stopped playing and stretched his hands. That was when his attention moved across the hall. His eyes paused when he noticed the boy standing near the back wall. The boy was not moving like the others. He wasn't holding a phone or whispering with friends. He was simply standing there, listening. The pianist looked at him for a moment, curious. He leaned toward one of the hall assistants and quietly asked about the child. The assistant shrugged gently. "I'm not sure," she said. "He came in earlier. He's just been listening." The pianist glanced back at the boy again. Something about the child's calm expression caught his attention. Maybe it was the way the boy stood so still while the music played. Or maybe it was the quiet focus on his face. The pianist closed the piano lid halfway and stood up. The room grew curious. People wondered what he was about to do. Instead of returning backstage, he stepped down from the small stage and slowly walked toward the back of the hall. The sound of his footsteps echoed softly. Soon he stopped a few steps away from the boy. Up close, it was clear the child could not see him. The boy's eyes stayed calm and distant, but the boy seemed aware someone had approached. He smiled slightly. "Hello," the pianist said kindly. The boy turned his head toward the sound of the voice. "Hello," he replied softly. The people nearby began watching closely. The pianist spoke again, his tone gentle. "Did you come here to listen to the music?" The boy nodded. "Yes," he said. "I like the sound of the piano." The answer was simple, but something about the way he said it sounded honest and full of feeling. The pianist smiled a little. "Well, you came to the right place," he said. A few people around them chuckled quietly. The pianist looked toward the stage and then back at the boy. Playful idea crossed his mind. "Do you play piano?" he asked. The boy paused for a moment. "A little," he said. Some of the students nearby exchanged amused looks. The pianist crossed his arms casually. "A little," he repeated. The boy nodded. "I practice when I can." The pianist looked thoughtful for a moment. He didn't mean any harm, but he assumed the boy probably knew only a few simple notes. After all, many children like to try piano. He gestured gently toward the stage. "Well," he said with a friendly smile, "why don't you come try the piano?" The boy seemed surprised. "Me?" he asked. "Yes," the pianist replied. "Just for fun." The words were light-hearted. People nearby smiled, thinking it would be a sweet little moment before rehearsal continued. Someone guided the boy carefully through the rows of chairs toward the stage. The hall grew quieter with every step he took. The boy walked slowly, feeling the floor beneath his shoes. When he reached the piano, he stopped beside the bench. The grand piano looked enormous compared to him. The assistant gently helped him sit down. The boy placed his hands carefully on the edge of the keys. For a moment, he didn't play anything. He simply rested his fingers there. His head tilted slightly as if he were listening to the silence itself. The crowd waited. Some people expected him to tap out a simple tune. Others thought he might feel nervous and stop. But the boy remained calm. His fingers slowly moved across the smooth surface of the keys, almost like he was greeting them. The famous pianist stood a few steps away with his arms folded, watching curiously. The room became so quiet that even the faint hum of the lights could be heard. Then the boy gently pressed the first key. A single soft note floated through the hall. He pressed another, then another. The melody started slowly, very simple, just a few notes. But there was something unusual about the way he played them. His timing was careful. His touch was delicate. The famous pianist uncrossed his arms. He leaned forward slightly. The boy's fingers continued moving. The melody grew stronger. More notes joined together. The quiet sound began filling the entire room. People in the audience stopped smiling. They leaned forward. Something about the music was beginning to change. And the famous pianist suddenly realized something unexpected. This boy wasn't just playing around. Something far more surprising was about to unfold. The soft notes continued to float through the concert hall. At first, people thought the boy was only testing the piano. His fingers pressed the keys slowly, one after another, as if he was learning where everything was. But the strange thing was this. He did not seem lost. Most beginners usually look down at the keys or pause often while searching for the right notes. This boy did not do that. Even though his eyes could not see the piano, his hands moved across the keys with surprising confidence. A quiet whisper passed through the audience. Some people leaned toward each other, trying to understand what they were hearing. The famous pianist, who had been standing nearby with a relaxed posture, slowly straightened his back. The small smile on his face faded and turned into a look of curiosity. The boy continued playing. The melody slowly began to grow. At first it sounded simple, almost like a soft lullaby. The kind of tune someone might hum quietly while walking home at night. But then the notes began to change. The boy's left hand joined in more strongly, adding deeper sounds beneath the melody. His right hand moved faster, dancing lightly across the higher keys. Suddenly the music felt alive. The audience could feel the rhythm building. A few students sitting in the front row looked at each other in surprise. These were people who had studied piano for years. They recognized the structure of the music. This was not random playing. There was shape in the melody. There was feeling in every note. The boy's face remained calm as his fingers continued moving. His head tilted slightly as if he was listening closely to every sound that came from the piano. It almost looked like he was having a quiet conversation with the instrument. The famous pianist took a slow step closer to the stage. Something inside him had changed. At first he had invited the boy to play simply for a lighthearted moment. But now he was beginning to feel something else. Curiosity. Real curiosity. The boy moved into another part of the melody. This time the notes became quicker, more confident. His hands traveled smoothly across the keyboard without hesitation. The sound filled the tall room beautifully. Every corner of the concert hall seemed to carry the music. People who had been standing near the walls slowly stepped closer. No one wanted to miss what was happening. Even the staff members who had been busy preparing things backstage quietly walked into the hall and stopped to listen. The boy's music now had emotion. It rose and fell like waves in the ocean. Sometimes the notes were gentle and quiet. Other times they grew strong and powerful, echoing across the wooden floor. The famous pianist felt a strange feeling in his chest. He had spent his whole life studying music. He had heard thousands of performances in many countries. Yet there was something about this moment that felt different. The boy's playing was not perfect in the way trained musicians often play. But it had something more important. It had heart. The melody suddenly slowed. The boy's fingers pressed a few soft keys, letting the notes stretch gently into the air. The sound hung there for a moment before fading away. The room was completely silent. No one spoke. No one moved. Then the boy began a new melody. This one sounded deeper, more emotional. His hands moved with surprising speed now. The rhythm became stronger, almost like a story unfolding through music. A woman sitting near the middle row slowly covered her mouth with her hand. She looked amazed. A young music student whispered quietly, "How is he doing that?" Another student simply shook his head. They could not understand it. The famous pianist was now standing very close to the piano. His eyes were fixed on the boy's hands. He noticed something important. The boy was not guessing where the keys were. His fingers moved as if they already knew the piano perfectly. That realization made the pianist's heart beat a little faster. The music grew louder again, then suddenly soft. The boy used both hands in a beautiful pattern that rolled across the keys like flowing water. Some people in the audience began recording the moment on their phones. They knew this was not ordinary. The melody reached a powerful moment. The boy pressed several deep notes together, creating a sound that filled the entire hall. The vibration echoed through the wooden floor and into the tall ceiling above. Then suddenly the music became quiet again. Very quiet. His fingers slowed. Each note now felt careful and meaningful. The famous pianist felt something unexpected. He felt emotional. He could not explain why. Maybe it was the honesty in the music. Maybe it was the courage of the boy sitting there, playing without seeing the keys, trusting only his ears and his heart. The boy finished the melody with a gentle final chord. The sound slowly faded into silence. For a moment, the room remained completely still. No one seemed ready to break the quiet. Then someone in the back of the hall softly began clapping. Another person joined. Within seconds, the entire room filled with applause. People stood up from their seats. Some cheered. Others simply kept clapping with wide smiles on their faces. The boy sat quietly at the piano bench, listening to the sound of the applause. He looked slightly surprised by the reaction. The famous pianist walked forward slowly. He did not clap at first. Instead, he stood beside the piano and looked at the boy carefully. There was deep respect in his eyes now. The playful mood from earlier had completely disappeared. When the applause finally faded, the pianist spoke gently. "That was beautiful," he said. The boy turned his head toward the voice. "Thank you," he replied softly. The pianist studied him for a moment. Then he asked a question that everyone in the room wanted to know. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The boy hesitated slightly. "I listen to music," he said. The answer sounded simple. Too simple. The pianist frowned slightly, thinking he had misunderstood. "You listen to music?" he repeated. The boy nodded. "Yes, I try to remember the sounds." A murmur passed through the audience again. The pianist placed one hand gently on the edge of the piano. "How long have you been playing?" he asked. The boy thought for a moment. "I don't know exactly," he said quietly. "A few years." The pianist's eyes widened just a little. "A few years?" That answer did not seem possible. Most students needed many years of lessons to reach even half that level. The pianist looked at the boy's hands again. They were small, but they moved with the confidence of someone who truly understood music. The famous musician felt a growing sense of wonder. There was something very special about this child. He looked out at the audience for a moment. Then he turned back toward the boy. A small smile returned to his face. "Would you like to play something else?" he asked. The boy seemed surprised again. "Another piece?" he asked. "Yes," the pianist said gently. This time his voice held a new tone. It was no longer playful. It was serious. Because now he truly wanted to know something. How far could this boy go? The boy slowly lifted his hands and placed them back on the piano keys. The room became quiet once more. Everyone leaned forward in their seats. They knew they were about to hear something special again. But none of them realized just how incredible the next performance would be. The room slowly returned to silence. The applause had faded, but the feeling in the air had not changed. People were still thinking about what they had just heard. The music from the boy had surprised everyone. The famous pianist stood beside the piano, watching quietly. When he asked the boy if he wanted to play something else, the boy paused for a moment. He seemed to think about it carefully, as if choosing the right answer. Then he nodded. "Yes," he said softly. The audience became very still again. Some people sat down slowly while others leaned forward in their chairs. A few held their phones up, ready to record another moment. The boy lifted his hands from his lap and placed them gently back on the piano keys. He did not rush. His fingers rested on the keys as if he was greeting them again. For a few seconds he simply sat there listening. Listening to the room. Listening to the quiet. The famous pianist noticed this small detail immediately. Experienced musicians often did the same thing before beginning a piece. They took a moment to feel the space and prepare their mind. Seeing the boy do it so naturally made the pianist even more curious. The boy slowly pressed one key. The note was soft and clear. Then another followed. But this time the melody did not start the same way as before. Instead of gentle testing notes, the boy began with a stronger rhythm. His left hand moved lower on the piano, creating deep sounds that echoed across the concert hall. The right hand joined quickly, forming a bright melody above the deeper tones. Within seconds, the music grew more powerful than the first piece. People in the audience exchanged surprised looks again. A young student sitting in the front row whispered quietly, "This sounds much harder." Another student nodded slowly, unable to take their eyes off the stage. The boy's fingers were moving faster now. They traveled across the keyboard with confidence, touching different parts of the piano without hesitation. He still could not see the keys, but he seemed to know exactly where every note lived. The famous pianist slowly walked around to the other side of the piano so he could see the boy's hands more clearly. What he saw made him pause. The boy's fingers were relaxed but precise. Each movement had purpose. Nothing looked random or accidental. The rhythm grew stronger. The music began to sound like a real concert performance. It rose and fell in waves of emotion. Sometimes the notes were soft and thoughtful, like someone speaking quietly about a memory. Other moments became bright and energetic, filling the entire room with excitement. The audience listened with full attention. No one whispered now. No one looked at their phone. The only thing that mattered was the music. The boy's head moved slightly with the rhythm as he played. It was clear he was feeling every part of the melody. The famous pianist felt a strange mix of emotions while watching him. Part of him was amazed. Part of him was confused. And another part of him felt something deeper. Respect. He had met many talented musicians during his career. Some were trained at the best music schools in the world. But talent like this did not appear often, especially not in someone so young. The melody suddenly changed direction. The boy's right hand climbed higher on the keyboard, while the left hand created a steady pattern below. The notes sparkled like sunlight reflecting on water. A woman sitting near the front quietly wiped her eyes. She didn't know why the music was affecting her so strongly. But something about the boy's playing felt honest and full of emotion. Felt real. The piece continued to grow. The boy added faster notes now, creating a beautiful flow of sound that seemed almost impossible for someone his age. Even the trained musicians in the audience looked amazed. They understood how difficult this kind of playing could be. Yet the boy did not look nervous or strained. His shoulders stayed relaxed. His breathing remained calm. He simply played. The famous pianist folded his arms again, but this time not in a casual way. He was studying every movement carefully. Something important had become clear. The boy was not copying a simple tune he had memorized. He was shaping the music as he played it. He was adding feeling to every phrase. That meant something remarkable. The boy truly understood music. The melody reached a dramatic moment. The boy's hands moved quickly across the keyboard, producing a powerful series of notes that echoed through the concert hall like rolling thunder. Several people in the audience gasped quietly. Then, just as quickly, the music softened again. The boy pressed a few gentle notes that floated into the air like falling snow. The sudden change in emotion made the performance even more beautiful. The famous pianist felt a deep sense of admiration growing inside him. He realized something important. When he had invited the boy to play earlier, he had expected a simple moment. A child touching a few keys for fun. But now he understood the truth. This boy carried something special. A natural gift that could not be easily explained. The music continued for several more minutes. Every part of the melody felt meaningful. Every pause felt intentional. Finally, the boy slowed the rhythm. His fingers pressed a few quiet notes one after another. The melody gently came to rest. He played a final soft chord. The sound drifted across the room and slowly faded away. For a moment, the concert hall was completely silent. Then the applause returned. This time it was even louder than before. People stood up from their seats. Some clapped with wide smiles. Others simply shook their heads in disbelief. The boy sat quietly on the bench again, listening to the applause surrounding him. The famous pianist stepped closer to the piano. This time he began clapping too. Not politely, but with real admiration. When the applause slowly faded, he spoke again. "That was incredible," he said. The boy smiled shyly. "Thank you," he replied. The pianist leaned slightly toward him. "I want to ask you something," he said gently. The boy nodded. "Okay." The pianist looked at the boy's hands resting on the piano keys. "Do you read music?" he asked. The boy shook his head. "No." The pianist blinked in surprise. "You don't read sheet music?" "No," the boy said again. "I just listen." A quiet murmur passed through the audience. The pianist tried to understand. "You mean you learn everything by hearing it?" "Yes," the boy replied. The pianist felt another wave of amazement. Learning complex music by ear alone was extremely difficult. Yet the boy had just performed something that many trained students would struggle to play. The famous musician looked out at the audience for a moment. Then he turned back to the boy. There was a thoughtful look on his face now. "Can I ask one more question?" he said. The boy nodded again. "When you practice," the pianist continued, "what kind of piano do you use?" The boy hesitated. His hands moved slowly away from the keys. He answered quietly, "At home, we have an old one." The pianist waited. The boy continued, "Some keys don't work very well." The room became silent again. People looked at each other in surprise. An old piano with broken keys. Yet somehow this boy had learned to play like this. The famous pianist felt something change deep inside him. He realized the boy's story might be even more remarkable than the music itself. He looked down at the grand piano in front of them. Then he looked back at the boy. And in that moment, a powerful idea began forming in his mind. An idea that could change the boy's future forever. The applause slowly faded, but the feeling in the room remained strong. People were still standing, still looking at the boy sitting quietly at the piano. It was clear that something special had just happened, and no one wanted the moment to end. The famous pianist stood beside the piano, thinking carefully. The boy's words from a few moments earlier stayed in his mind. "At home, we have an old one. Some keys don't work very well." The pianist looked down at the grand piano in front of them. It was one of the best instruments in the hall. Every key responded perfectly. Every sound was clear and balanced. Yet the boy had learned his skill on an old piano with broken keys. That thought was hard to understand. The pianist leaned slightly closer to the boy. "Can I ask you something else?" he said gently. The boy nodded. "Yes. When you practice at home," the pianist continued, "how often do you play?" The boy thought for a moment. Almost every day, he said quietly. Every day? The pianist repeated. Yes, when I can. The pianist raised his eyebrows slightly. And you taught yourself just by listening? The boy nodded again. I listen to music on the radio sometimes, he explained, and I try to remember how it sounds. Several people in the audience exchanged surprised looks. Learning music by listening alone was already difficult. But remembering entire pieces and recreating them on a piano with broken keys sounded almost impossible. The famous pianist folded his arms again, but this time his face looked thoughtful. He studied the boy carefully. How old are you? He asked. The boy answered softly. 10. A quiet wave of whispers moved through the room. 10 years old. Some of the music students sitting in the front row had been taking lessons longer than that. Yet many of them could not play with the same emotion and confidence the boy had just shown. The pianist slowly sat down on the piano bench beside the boy. The audience watched closely. Would it be all right if I try something with you? The pianist asked. The boy turned his head toward the sound of the voice. What kind of thing? He asked. The pianist smiled slightly. A little musical conversation. The boy looked curious. Okay, he said. The pianist placed his hands on the piano keys. He played a short series of notes. They were quick and playful, like a small musical question. Then he lifted his hands and waited. The boy tilted his head slightly as if thinking. A few seconds passed. Then the boy answered with his own notes. He repeated the same pattern the pianist had played, but he added a few extra notes at the end, giving the melody a new twist. The audience reacted with quiet laughter and surprise. The pianist smiled wider. That was good, he said. He played another short phrase, this time a little more complex. Again he lifted his hands. The boy listened carefully. Then his fingers moved across the keys again. He repeated the phrase almost perfectly. Once more he added his own small variation. Now the audience could clearly see what was happening. It was like a friendly musical game. The pianist asked questions with the piano. The boy answered them. Each answer became a little more creative. The famous musician felt excitement growing inside him. The boy was not just copying the sounds. He understood them. He understood how to shape them. That was something very rare. The pianist played a third musical phrase. This time it was faster, more challenging. The boy paused longer before responding. But when he finally played his answer, the notes flowed smoothly. Even better than before. The audience burst into applause again. The pianist laughed softly. He looked at the boy with clear admiration now. You have a very special ear, he said. The boy smiled shyly. I like how the piano sounds, he replied. The pianist nodded slowly. Yes, he said quietly. I can see that. He turned toward the audience for a moment. Many people were still recording the moment with their phones. Others simply watched with wide eyes. Then the pianist looked back at the boy. Who taught you your first song? He asked. The boy hesitated again. No one, he said. No one? The pianist repeated. The boy shook his head. I just tried to copy what I heard. The pianist leaned back slightly on the bench. He was silent for a few seconds. Then he spoke again, this time more gently. Do you ever play in front of people? The boy shook his head again. No, only at home. The pianist looked surprised. Not even at school? No. The audience murmured quietly again. It seemed impossible that someone with such ability had never played for an audience before. The pianist suddenly felt something important. He realized the boy might never have had the chance. Maybe there had been no teacher to guide him. Maybe there had been no stage for him to perform on. Yet despite all that, the boy had still discovered music on his own. The famous musician slowly stood up. He walked a few steps away from the piano and looked out across the concert hall. Hundreds of eyes were watching him. He took a slow breath. Then he turned back toward the boy. Would you mind if I try something a little harder? He asked. The boy nodded again. I can try. The pianist returned to the bench and sat down beside him once more. This time he played a longer piece of music. It lasted nearly 30 seconds. The melody twisted and turned across the keyboard. jumping between high and low notes. It was not easy. In fact, it was something many trained students would struggle to repeat. When he finished, the pianist lifted his hands again. He looked at the boy. The boy sat very still. He seemed to replay the sounds inside his mind. The room felt completely silent. Then the boy slowly lifted his hands. His fingers moved across the keys. The audience leaned forward in their seats. One by one, the notes began to appear. The same melody, the same rhythm, the same pattern. The boy repeated nearly the entire phrase perfectly. But at the end, he added something new again. A small musical ending that sounded beautiful and natural. The concert hall exploded with applause. People stood up again. Some even cheered loudly. The famous pianist looked stunned. For a moment he did not move. Then he slowly stood and faced the audience. He raised his hands slightly, asking for quiet. The applause slowly faded again. The pianist turned toward the boy one more time. There was deep respect in his voice when he spoke. "You know," he said, "I have traveled all over the world." The boy listened carefully. "I have heard many great musicians," the pianist continued. He paused for a moment. Then he said something that surprised everyone in the room. "But today, I think I may have met one of the most natural talents I have ever seen." A soft wave of whispers moved through the audience. The boy looked confused by the praise. He simply sat there quietly. The pianist placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "What you have is very rare," he said. The boy did not fully understand the meaning of those words. But everyone else in the room did. The famous pianist looked thoughtful again. Another idea was forming in his mind. A much bigger one this time. He realized this moment could not simply end as a beautiful surprise. The boy deserved something more. Something that could help his gift grow even stronger. The pianist looked out across the room again. Then he turned back to the boy and spoke softly. "I think your music deserves to be heard by many more people." The boy tilted his head slightly. "What do you mean?" he asked. The pianist smiled gently. "I mean," he said, "this may only be the beginning of your story." The room stayed quiet after the famous pianist spoke those words. People looked between him and the boy, sensing that something important was about to happen. The boy sat at the piano bench with his hands resting gently on his lap. He could hear the soft movements of the audience, the small creaks of chairs, and the quiet breathing of people around him. But he did not know what everyone was thinking. The pianist looked at the boy again. There was kindness in his eyes now, but also deep respect. A few minutes earlier he had asked the child to play only for fun. Now he realized the moment had turned into something much bigger. He spoke again, this time in a calm voice that everyone in the hall could hear. "You have something very special," he said. The boy tilted his head slightly, listening carefully. "I just like playing," he answered quietly. The simple reply made several people in the audience smile. The pianist nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "and that love for music is very important." He walked a few steps away from the piano and looked across the concert hall again. Some people were still standing. Others had slowly sat back down, but their attention had not moved away from the stage. A few of the music students looked excited. They felt like they were watching the beginning of a story they would remember for a long time. The pianist turned back toward the boy. "Can you tell me something?" he asked gently. The boy nodded. "Yes. Does anyone teach you music right now?" The boy shook his head. "No." The answer was quiet but clear. The pianist paused. "And the piano at home," he continued. "The one with the broken keys? Is that the only piano you have?" "Yes," the boy replied. The room felt silent again. Several people exchanged thoughtful looks. The famous pianist slowly walked back toward the piano bench. He stood beside the boy for a moment, thinking. He had spent his entire life surrounded by music. He had studied with great teachers and practiced on beautiful instruments in the best concert halls in the world. This boy had none of those things. Yet somehow he had discovered music on his own. The pianist finally spoke again. "I would like to help you," he said. The boy looked surprised. "Help me?" he asked. "Yes," the pianist replied. He sat down again beside the boy so their voices would not feel distant. "I think you deserve the chance to learn even more about music," he explained. The boy stayed quiet for a moment. "I already practice a lot," he said softly. The pianist smiled gently. "I can tell," he replied. "But imagine how much more you could do if you had the right teacher and a piano that worked perfectly." The boy thought about those words. He had never imagined something like that. At home, the old piano had always been enough. Even when certain keys made strange sounds or did not respond well, he simply learned to work around them. To him, music had always been something simple and personal. But the people in the concert hall understood something bigger. The famous pianist stood up again and turned toward the audience. "Everyone here just heard something remarkable," he said. The room grew quiet. "This young musician has taught himself to play simply by listening," the pianist continued. "And he has done it on an instrument that does not even work properly." Some people shook their heads in amazement. "That kind of dedication and natural ability is very rare," the pianist said. He paused for a moment. Then he spoke again. "I believe talent like this should be supported." The audience began clapping softly. The pianist looked back toward the boy. "I would like to help arrange proper music lessons for you," he said. The boy blinked in surprise. "Lessons?" he repeated. "Yes," the pianist replied. The boy seemed unsure what to say. "Would I still be able to play the music I like?" he asked after a moment. The pianist laughed gently. "Of course," he said. "Lessons don't stop your creativity. They simply help you understand music even more." The boy slowly smiled. "That sounds nice," he said. The audience clapped again, louder this time. But the pianist was not finished speaking. "There is something else," he added. The room quieted once more. He walked over to the grand piano and rested his hand on its polished surface. "An instrument like this should be available to someone with such passion for music," he said. People listened carefully. The pianist turned toward the hall manager, who was standing near the side of the stage. "I believe we can find a piano for him," he said with a small smile. The audience reacted with a wave of excited murmurs. The boy looked confused. "A piano?" he asked. The pianist nodded. "Yes," he said. "One that works the way it should." The boy sat silently for a moment. Then he spoke very quietly. "I have never played on a piano like this before." The pianist looked down at the grand instrument again. "Well," he said gently, "you did today." A few people in the audience laughed warmly. The atmosphere in the concert hall felt different now. What had started as a simple rehearsal afternoon had turned into something meaningful. Several audience members were already talking about the boy's performance. A few journalists who had come to cover the evening concert were writing quick notes in their notebooks. One of them whispered to a colleague, "This is going to be a story people will want to hear." Meanwhile, the boy remained seated at the piano bench, still trying to understand everything that had just happened. Just an hour earlier, he had been standing quietly at the back of the hall, hoping only to listen to music. Now everyone was looking at him. The pianist noticed the boy's quiet expression. He leaned down slightly. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked kindly. The boy nodded. "Yes," he said. "Just a lot of things happening?" the pianist asked. The boy smiled a little. "Yes." The pianist laughed softly. "I understand that feeling," he said. He looked at the boy's hands again. Those small hands had just filled the entire concert hall with music. "You know something?" the pianist said. "What?" the boy asked. "Today you reminded me why music is so powerful," the pianist said. The boy tilted his head slightly. "How?" The pianist looked around the room again. "All of these people came here to watch a rehearsal," he explained. "But instead, they witnessed something unexpected." He paused. "Pure talent." The boy didn't say anything. He simply listened. The pianist placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "This moment is only the beginning," he said. The audience could feel that he meant every word. Some people were already imagining the boy's future. Would he become a great musician one day? Would the world hear his music? No one knew yet, but everyone in that concert hall understood one thing. They had just witnessed the start of a very special journey. And the next step in that journey was about to change the boy's life in a way he never expected. The concert hall slowly began to settle after the excitement. People were still talking quietly about what they had just witnessed. Some were smiling, some were shaking their heads in disbelief, and others were replaying the music in their minds. The boy still sat at the piano bench, his hands resting calmly in his lap. Everything had happened so quickly that he was still trying to understand it all. The famous pianist stood nearby, watching him with a thoughtful expression. A short time earlier, he had simply wanted to rehearse for the evening performance. Instead, the day had turned into something completely unexpected. He walked back toward the boy and sat beside him again. "Are you tired?" he asked gently. The boy shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "Good," the pianist replied with a warm smile. He looked out toward the audience again. Many people were still standing around the hall. No one seemed ready to leave. It felt like everyone wanted to remember the moment a little longer. The pianist leaned slightly closer to the boy. "There's something I want you to understand," he said. The boy turned his head toward the voice. "Okay," he replied. "When people heard you play today, they didn't just hear notes," the pianist explained. "They heard feeling. That is something many musicians spend years trying to learn." The boy listened carefully. "I just play what I hear," he said. The pianist nodded slowly. "Yes, and that honesty is very powerful." The boy thought about those words quietly. After a moment, he asked a small question. "Do you think I can become a really good piano player someday?" The pianist smiled. "I think you already are one," he answered. Several people nearby heard the reply and clapped softly. The boy smiled shyly. For the first time since he sat down at the piano, he seemed to relax. The pianist stood up and looked around the hall again. The manager of the concert venue was speaking quietly with a few staff members near the stage. They had been discussing the surprising moment that had just taken place. One of them walked toward the pianist. "That was incredible," the manager said. "Everyone is talking about it." The pianist nodded. "It was," he replied. The manager looked at the boy sitting at the piano. "He's very special," he said. The pianist agreed. "Yes, he is." The manager smiled. "If you really want to help him, we would be happy to support that," he said. The pianist appreciated the offer. "That means a lot," he replied. Meanwhile, people in the audience were beginning to talk about the boy's performance more openly. Some had already shared short videos with friends. Others were telling nearby guests what they had just witnessed. A group of music students gathered near the stage. One of them whispered, "I've never seen anything like that." Another student nodded. "And he said he taught himself." They looked back at the boy with admiration. The famous pianist returned his attention to the boy again. "Would you like to play one more time before we finish today?" he asked. The boy seemed surprised. "Another song?" he asked. "Yes," the pianist replied. The boy slowly placed his hands back on the piano keys. The room gradually became quiet again. Even though the boy had already played twice, the audience was eager to hear him again. This time there was no challenge, no test, just music. The boy gently pressed the first note. The sound floated softly through the concert hall. His fingers moved slowly at first, creating a calm melody that felt peaceful and thoughtful. The music sounded different from the earlier pieces. This one felt lighter, almost like a quiet story. The audience listened carefully. The famous pianist stood nearby, watching with a proud smile. The boy's playing was relaxed now. Without the pressure of being tested, he seemed even more comfortable. The melody grew warmer as the notes flowed together. A few people in the audience closed their eyes while listening. It felt like the music carried emotion that words could not explain. The piece lasted several minutes. When the boy finally reached the last note, the sound gently faded into the quiet room. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the applause returned once more. But this time it was softer, more respectful. People were not cheering loudly now. They were simply showing appreciation. The boy slowly lifted his hands from the keys again. The pianist stepped forward and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "That was beautiful," he said. The boy smiled. "Thank you." The pianist looked toward the audience again. "I think everyone here will remember today for a very long time," he said. Many people nodded in agreement. The manager stepped forward again and spoke quietly with the pianist. They discussed a few plans to help support the boy's musical journey. Soon it became clear that this moment would not be forgotten after the concert ended. Several people wanted to help. Music teachers offered to volunteer their time. A local music school offered access to practice rooms. And the concert hall promised to stay in touch with the boy's family. The famous pianist felt happy hearing all of this. He knew that talent needed opportunity. And now that opportunity was beginning to appear. The boy stood up from the piano bench. Someone gently guided him down from the stage. Before leaving, he turned his head toward the piano one more time. Even though he could not see it, he knew exactly where it was. He reached out and touched the edge of the instrument gently, almost like saying goodbye. The pianist noticed the small moment and smiled. "You'll see many pianos in your life," he said kindly. The boy nodded. "I hope so," he replied. People slowly began leaving the concert hall. But the conversations about the performance continued everywhere. Near the doors, in the hallway, outside on the street, everyone seemed to be telling the same story. A young boy had walked into the hall quietly. No one expected anything unusual. But when he sat at the piano, he revealed a gift that amazed everyone. Later that evening, the famous pianist stepped onto the stage again for the scheduled concert. The hall was full. But before he began playing, he said something to the audience. "Earlier today," he said, "I was reminded that music does not belong only to professionals or concert halls." The audience listened carefully. "Sometimes," he continued, "the most powerful music comes from someone who simply loves the sound of it." Many people in the audience knew exactly what he meant, because earlier that day they had witnessed that truth themselves. And somewhere not far away, a young boy with a remarkable ear for music was beginning a journey that would carry his talent far beyond that first unexpected performance. A journey that started with a simple invitation. Just play something, for fun.